አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምብኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎ ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ ዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔ ነው። አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔም ነው።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔ ነው።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የሁላችንም ነው።
የኛ ቤተሰብ አደባባይ ሚዲያን ይመለከታል። የእናንተስ?
Do your parents watch አደባባይ ሚዲያ?
Watch, follow, subscribe and help አደባባይ። አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ።
You're broken down and tired.
For the whole year, the narrative was a false narrative. It was all about TPLF. The people that were committing the crime were being seen as victims. And the victims that were being killed, massacred, like these names that you're holding from my cadre, were being seen as the aggressors.
We gon' walk it out.
We in the Black Alliance for Peace stand in uncompromising opposition to the U.S.-led imperialist aggression against Ethiopia and by extension against her neighboring countries, Eritrea, Somalia, and beyond.
The U.S. military is not welcome in Africa.
U.S. policy has actually been very consistent for the last 40 years when it comes to the Horn of Africa. Keep them divided.
No more. No more. No more.
We will not scapegoat you. We will not start another war. We should not do so.
When will these women find justice? When will these poor people find peace?
Hands up, Ethiopia! Hands up, Ethiopia! Hands up, Eritrea! Hands up, Eritrea!
The U.S. government is wrong. The European governments are wrong. CNN is wrong. All of them have turned these pernicious lies about what's happening into Ethiopia into yet another regime change operation.
Who wants freedom for Africans?
Ethiopia.
Who has defeated invaders for generations?
Ethiopia.
The people united will never be defeated.
Biden administration!
Biden administration!
Stop the war on Ethiopia!
On Ethiopia!
We are Ethiopia! Three nations!
ሱዳናውያን፣ አፍሪካውያን፣ ናይጄሪያ፣ ኬንያ፣ ሌሎችም እየቆሙ ነው ያሉ። ኖሞር እያለ ያለው ኢትዮጵያዊ ብቻ አይደለም አፍሪካዊም ነው።
Ethiopia!
Ethiopia! Ethiopia! Ethiopia!
Rise like the day, I'll rise up. In spite of the air, I will rise 1,000 times.
Freedom!
What do we want?
Freedom!
When do we want it?
Now!
When do we want it?
Now!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
TPLF!
TPLF!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
ሰላም ጤና ይስጥልኝ እንደምን ዋላችሁ እንደምን አረፈዳችሁ እንደምን አመሻችሁ በያላችሁበት ይህ የአደባባይ ሚዲያ የሮብ ዝግጅታችን ነው የቀኑ ዝግጅታችን ነው እንግዲህ ዛሬ የሲያትልን የኖሞር ሰላማዊ ሰልፍ ለመዘገብ መተናል እንዴት ዋሉ ምንስ ተሳካ የሚለውን ነገር አብረን የምናየው ይሆናል እስከዛው ድረስ ቀድማችሁ የመጣችሁ እዚህ ላይቭ ላይ ገባችሁትን ለማመስገን እፈልጋለሁ እንግዲህ የተወሰኑ እንግዳዎችም ስለያዝን ጊዜያችንን ለመጠቀም ያህል ብዙ ያንን መልእክት አላነብም እንደተለመደው ግን ጥያቄዎች ካላችሁ ጥያቄዎቻችን ላኩልንና ለፓናሊስቶቻችን እሱን እናሳያለን ከዛ በፊት ግን ዛሬ እንግዲህ እንዳየነው የድል ዜና አለ ከኢትዮጵያ ማለት ነው እሱን ተመልክተን እንመለሳለን እስከዛ ሼር ላይክ ያረጋችሁ እንድትጠብቁት በትህትና አሳስባለሁ መልካም ቆይታ ይሁንልን
ሰበር ዜና ጀግኖቹ የመከላከያ ሰራዊትና የአማራ ክልል የጸጥታ ኃይሎች የሰቆጣ ከተማን ተቆጣጣሩ በአንጻባራቂ ድል ወደፊት እየገሰገሱ የሚገኙት ጀግኖቹ የመከላከያ ሰራዊትና የአማራ የጸጥታ ኃይሎች አብዛኞቹን የዋግ ኽምራ አካባቢዎች ነፃ በማውጣት የዞኑን ዋና ከተማ ሰቆጣን ተቆጣጥረዋል አካባቢው ከአሸባሪ ህወሓት ነፃ በሚወጣበት ጊዜ የዋግ ኽምራ ሚሊሻዎች አስደናቂ ጀብድ የፈጸሙ ሲሆን የአካባቢው ህዝብም ከመከላከያ ሰራዊትና ከአማራ ክልል የጸጥታ ኃይሎች ጋር በመጣመር ደጀንነቱን በብቃት አሳይቷል የመከላከያ ሰራዊትና የአማራ የጸጥታ ኃይሎች ቀሪዎቹን ስፍራ እያጸዱ የፈረጠጠውን ያሸባሪውን ጀሌ እየደመሰሱ ወደ አበርገሌ በመገስገስ ላይ ይገኛሉ በተያያዘም ጀግኖቹ የመከላከያ ሰራዊትና የአማራ ክልል የጸጥታ ኃይሎች በቆቦ ግንባር ባንድ በኩል ሙጃና ጥሙጋ ላይ የፈረሰውን የጠላት ኃይል በመጥረግ ወደ አላማጣ ከተማ ሲሆን በሌላ በኩል ደግሞ ተኩለሽን ተቆጣጥረው በማጽዳት ወደ መረዋና ኮረም እየገሰገሱ ይገኛሉ በእሳታማው የጀግኖቹ ክንድ የተደቆሰው አሸባሪ ህወሓት ተቸካይና ኋላ ቀር በሆነ የጦር ዘይቤ እብሪትን እንደ መሳሪያ በመጠቀም ከገባባቸው የአማራና የአፋር ክልል አካባቢዎች እንደገባ መውጣት አቅቶት ሰብአዊና ቁሳዊ ኪሳራ ደርሶበት ተደምስሷል ይህንን ሀፍረቱን መሸፈን ሲያቅተው በአንድ በኩል ለሰላም ሲል የወጣ በሌላ በኩል ደግሞ ለሽንፈቱ ውሃ የማይቋጥር ምክንያት እያቀረበ አድኑኝ የሚል እሪታ እያሰማ በለመደው ውሸት የትግራይን ህዝብና የዓለምን ማህበረሰብ ለማደናገር እየሞከረ ይገኛል በዚህ ጦርነት የመጀመሪያው ገፈት ቀማሽ የሆነውና አሸባሪውን ህወሓት በጀግንነት የታገለው የዋግ ኽምራ ህዝብ በጀግኖቹ የመከላከያ ሰራዊት በአማራ የጸጥታ ኃይሎች እንዲሁም በራሱ ዋግ ኽምራ ህዝብ ትግል ከአሸባሪ ህወሓት ነፃ በመውጣቱ በዚሁ አጋጣሚ መንግስት እንኳን ደስ ያላችሁ ለማለት ይወዳል ነፃነታችንን የምናስከብረው በተባበረ ክንዳችን ነው የመንግስት ኮሙኒኬሽን አገልግሎት
Broken down and tired.
For the whole year, the narrative was a false narrative. It was all about TPLF. The people that were committing the crime were being seen as victims. And the victims that were being killed, massacred, like these names that you're holding from my cadre, were being seen as the aggressors.
We gon' walk it out.
We in the Black Alliance for Peace stand in uncompromising opposition to the U.S.-led imperialist aggression against Ethiopia and by extension against her neighboring countries, Eritrea, Somalia, and beyond. The U.S. military is not welcome in Africa.
U.S. policy has actually been very consistent for the last 40 years when it comes to the Horn of Africa. Keep them divided.
በኢትዮጵያ ጉዳይ
Shame on you! Shame on you!
No more! No more! No more!
We will not scapegoat you. We will not start another war. We should not do so.
When will these women find justice? When will these poor people find peace?
And all right.
Hands up, Ethiopia!
Hands up, Ethiopia! Hands up,
The US government is wrong. The European governments are wrong. CNN is wrong. All of them have turned these pernicious lies about what's happening into Ethiopia into yet another regime change operation.
Who wants freedom for Africans? Ethiopia. Who has defeated invaders for generations? Ethiopia. The people united will never be defeated.
Biden administration! Biden administration! Stop the war on Ethiopia!
We are Ethiopia!
Three nations!
ሱዳናውያን፣ አፍሪካውያን፣ ናይጄሪያ፣ ኬንያ፣ ሌሎችም እየቆሙ ነው ያሉ። ኖሞር እያለ ያለው ኢትዮጵያዊ ብቻ አይደለም አፍሪካዊም ነው።
Ethiopia!
Ethiopia! Ethiopia! Ethiopia! Rise like the day, I'll rise up. In spite of the air, I will rise 1,000 times.
Freedom!
What do we want?
Freedom!
When do we want it?
Now!
When do we want it?
Now!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
TPLF!
TPLF!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
Welcome back everyone. Thank you for being here with us. እንግዲህ የዛሬ እንግዶቼ የእንግሊዘኛ ተናጋሪዎች ናቸው። ስለዚህ we're going to do this program in English. ቃሌብ የላከው ሜሴጅ እንግዲህ በድሉ ምክንያት ነው ወይ እንዲለበሹ ብላኛል። አንድም በዛ ነው፣ ሁለትም አንዳንዴ አሁን ያለብንም ችግር የመጣው ኢትዮጵያዊነታችንን እየረሳን ስለነበረ ነውና እሱን አልፎ አልፎ ማስታወስ አይከፋም ነው። So thank you everyone for being here with us, and thank you for our guest Jane from Answer Coalition and Tuhut. It's such a unique name. I keep on blinking. Tuhut. Thank you so much for being here. I met you guys yesterday at the Seattle protest, so we're going to be talking about that today. But before then, if you could just quickly introduce yourself, Tuhut, and then Jane as well.
Like you said, my name is Tuhut, and I've been organizing with a group called Concerned Ethiopian Americans for Seattle. And I think our group is really just exactly what the name says. I was pulled into it by my mother, of all people, who has had a huge heart for Ethiopia for a very long time. And it got to a point where so much of the same things I've been worried about as an American that the news has been telling us constantly is about to happen to us any minute now if, we don't donate to the New York Times and raise money for the Democratic Party. Any minute, all of those things that I was afraid of, I was seeing happen, not just. So yeah, that's for me what got me involved. Jane?
So I'm Jane Cutter, and I'm a member of the Answer Coalition, a local organizer for Answer in Seattle. And Answer Coalition stands for Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. Do you want me to get into a little bit about the Answer Coalition now?
Yes, please. I think we've seen Answer Coalition everywhere when we were protesting in NoMore and almost in every state in America. So if you could just tell us a bit about who you guys are.
Absolutely. Answer Coalition was founded, I believe, September 14th, 2001. So just a few days after the terrorist attacks that, kind of started the so-called war on terrorism. Or the pretext for it, right? And the pretext even for the war on Iraq, even though Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with it. And so we organized to say that war and racism are not the answer. There was, a massive roundup of Arab and Muslim people in the United States shortly after 9/11. And of course, it was very clear that the United States was going to go to war. The people that came together in the Answer Coalition were anti-war organizers dating back to the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. So we knew, what was potentially in store, and that it was extremely important to bring people out into the street and try to show that the American people were not in favor of these wars. And The first demonstration that the Answer Coalition organized was at the end of September, I believe in the end of September 2001. And we went on from there and have organized some of the largest demonstrations around the Iraq War and the Afghan War, but also continuing on, to oppose, what happened to Libya, to oppose U.S. threats on Syria, to stand in solidarity with the people of Venezuela against regime change efforts there, and many other struggles I could mention. But it doesn't really matter who's in the White House. We're opposed to U.S. intervention, the use of sanctions as a weapon of economic terror, and we stand for the right of people to determine their own destiny in their own countries, not to be interfered with. That the United States seems to be against any country that seems to want to have an independent path, and not be subordinated to the United States economically and militarily. That seems to be some unforgivable sin from the viewpoint of the military-industrial complex and the powers that be in this country, all in the interest of some idea of, a U.S.-dominated world, all for the glory and betterment of corporations. So we stand against that. We stand against racism. We stand for social justice. And, looking around our society today here in the United States, we see there's many pressing needs that should be addressed. But so much money is going into the military budget that it really makes that impossible.
Yeah. I think sometimes there's a lot to unpack in what you said, for sure. And it's definitely a rude awakening for us as Ethiopian Americans in really understanding what the pattern is here and such. Just to go back to yesterday's protest in Seattle, if we could watch a few minutes of the footage that we have. We started at a local news station. We'll just watch that and we'll be.
I love it, guys. So now what we're gonna do is the Zagay Tayachon. Right there is Cairo 7. Sala Cairo 7 Mentalalachu. Okay, where's Tuhut? Tuhutiye, I want you to do some speech for us. So let's see, some chance. And no more domestic.
Say it, no more! No more! No more! No more! No more! No more! Alright, so Cairo acts like we're not here, so we're gonna ask them if they can see us. It's a long one. Say it with me. Cairo TV! Cairo TV! Can you see me? Can you see me? Cairo TV! Cairo TV! Can you see me? Can you see me? Cairo TV! Cairo TV! to them about the fake news? No more!
No more!
Fake news!
Fake news!
Fake news!
Fake news!
No more! Fake
No
news!
more!
So I'm gonna say fake news, you say no more. I didn't prep you for this. My bad. Fake news!
No more!
Fake news!
No more!
Fake news!
No more!
Fake news!
No more!
How do we feel about supporting regime change? Do we feel like no more?
No!
Regime change!
No more!
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 How about forever war? Do you like forever war?
No!
Forever war!
No more!
Forever war!
No more!
Forever war!
No more!
Forever war!
No more!
Okay, so you don't like fake news. You don't like regime change. You don't like forever war. He has 6 months. He has 6 months. But how do we feel about weaponizing human rights? No more? Weaponizing human rights? Weaponizing human rights? Weaponizing human rights? How do we feel about picking victims? How do we feel about picking victims? How do we feel about picking victims? How do we feel about weaponizing human rights? How do we feel about picking victims? How do we feel about weaponizing human rights? No more!
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 You think they can hear us? Let's tell them what they are. Fake news!
No more!
Fake news!
No more!
Fake news!
No more!
Let's tell them we need them. Cairo 7, fake news. I say Cairo, fake news. Cairo!
Fake news!
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 Let's make sure they can see us. Cairo!
Fake news!
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 And what do we say to fake news?
No more!
What do we say to fake news?
No more!
What do we say to fake news?
No more!
What do we say to fake news?
No more!
What do we say to Cairo?
No more!
Let's call them fake news. I say Cairo. You say fake news.
Yeah.
Cairo?
Fake news!
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 And what do we say to fake news?
No more!
I like Cairo. Let's say Cairo. Who's fake news?
Cairo!
Who's fake news?
Cairo!
Who's fake news?
Cairo!
Who's fake news?
Cairo!
And they're fake news because they pretend we're not here. We marched over 5,000 strong 1 month ago, yes, last month. And what did they say? Fake news. Fake news.
Cairo!
Fake news.
Cairo!
Fake news.
Cairo!
Fake news.
Cairo!
But we are a forgiving people. So let's tell them what they can do to earn back our trust. It's see me. So I'm going to say Cairo, you say see me, because you're here. You're out here. You're united. You're Americans. You're marching. You're telling them what you believe. And are they going to keep ignoring you, or are they going to see you? Say, see me. See me.
See me!
See me.
Cairo!
Cairo.
See me!
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 All right.
Thank you, everybody. I think they got the message. Where? I heard Cairo came to see us. Wait, did you come to see us? You can talk to me, I'm right here. Where is Cairo? Are you recording? What is it? Hey. Sir? 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 Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? I'm right here.
Talk to
Are you from Cairo?
Talk to us. Talk to us.
Okay, can you come on message? We have a message for Cairo. Thank you for coming. Obviously, you see, this is what happens. When you come out and unite, this is what happens. Thank you for coming. Yes. My message. What is my message? Where's Tehut? I think Tehut can clearly articulate what the message is, because I could get emotional talking about my country. So she will pass the message. Where's Tehut? She's right here. Tehut, can you explain why we're here?
We're here.
Use the mic.
That's a great idea. All right, we're here to protest the Biden administration's mixed message foreign policy indicating regime change is imminent. We are done with forever wars, we're done with proxy war, we're done with humanitarian intervention as a pretext for war. The same people who took us to Libya, the same people who keep our troops right now, American troops are fighting in Syria. How many years later? These people say, not in my homeland. We are Americans who love this country, who love everyone who makes this country work, and we want them to know that the media is not telling you the story. The media is choosing victims, selecting narratives. We've been shouting for a year, saying who the Tigray People's Liberation Front is, what they're doing with the billions of dollars of aid that has flown into the country for 40 years. These are the same people that their own supporters, Martin Plaut, if you look him up, he's a #1 TPLF supporter. In 2011, he wrote a detailed article in Western media about the way the TPLF used the 1989 famine to coerce people into fighting for them, to drive people off of their land in order to create more trauma porn for Western media. We are saying that the United States is a proud and impressive country full of multi-ethnic citizens who know how best to connect, how best to push our message in the 21st century. We don't need the politics of regime change.
So, in one sentence, what's your message? What do you want your message to be?
In one sentence, our message is, President Biden, the politics of regime change and fake humanitarian interventions in Africa will cost our country. It'll cost our people. We don't have the energy, the money, the time. American solutions for American problems, we have enough of them. African solutions for African problems, they can fix it.
Yeah, that's right, that's right, that's right, that's right.
Thank you. And if you have any questions,
No more.
Hold on a second, guys. If you do have any questions, I actually sent out a letter to the executives, to all the people that are over there.
Okay.
I don't know if you were sent, but what I do want to say before I give you my card is that if you have any questions, I'm the lead organizer. You can reach out to me. I'll point you to our media relation, and we can explain in great detail.
Okay.
But when I sent the email, I pretty much sent out 7 different documents. I want everybody to listen. 7 different documents that have the Maikadra, the TPLF, the NoMore speech. I just want to make sure that you understand that nobody responded to me.
Okay.
Here's this, and here's that. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, I need everybody to back up
Let's
now.
say things to back up.
Let
Welcome back, and thank you for being here with us. If you're just joining us, we're showing the protests from Seattle. I know they talk about Cairo, but it's not Cairo, Egypt. It's our local channel here that have not been covering on the protests that we've had. This is the second one in Seattle that had happened. So that's what the conversation is about. Thank you again for being here with me, Jane and Tsewa'e. Jane, if I can ask you, I know you gave us an introduction about what the Answer Coalition is, and you guys were here marching with us as well. How did you get involved with Answer Coalition, and why is that important for you?
Oh, wow. Thank you for asking. I mean, I was involved in the anti-war movement of the, really of the 80s, starting in the 80s. And
yeah, I can hear you.
For the draft, and then opposing U.S. Attempt to overthrow the government of Nicaragua through funding the Contras, and of course U.S. military aid to El Salvador. Moving into the 90s was, part of the struggle when the U.S. invaded Panama. Then, of course, the first U.S. intervention into Iraq, what people call the Gulf War, organizing against sanctions on Iraq. And then, of course, coming into the 21st century. So I was, with the what we now call the forever wars, right? Afghanistan, Iraq again, Syria, Libya. So I've been involved as an organizer in the anti-war movement for a long time. And even, when I was really too little to be an organizer, my parents even brought me to demonstrations against the Vietnam War. So I feel, I feel very strongly in my heart that, my enemy is not anybody in another country, that those people are my brothers and sisters. We all have the same human desires to, to have a good life for ourselves, a better life for our children, concern for the next generation. We want to have clean air, clean water, safety, security. These are human universals that we all share. And the people in Ethiopia, or the people in Venezuela, or the people in Iraq are not my enemy. And they try to tell us, somebody, the media, the government will try to tell us that somehow these people are my enemy, but I know that's not true.
Yeah. I think it's really difficult, especially, with all the news that we have here. For you to be involved is really admirable, to really understand what's going on, and even wanting to understand what's going on in the world and look beyond what the mainstream media is telling us, right? Because I myself was a victim of really thinking the forever wars were justified until a couple of years ago, where I start questioning the narratives that is being presented to us every day, right? In social media, even in the little pamphlets that look like they're activist messages, but are really against other countries, when we have so many problems here that we could be solving. Tsewa'e, I'll come to you, but let's hear a bit about, I'll come to you about how you got involved in this NoMore movement. But before then, let's see what the protesters are doing for a few minutes.
Can you see us? Can you see us? Right here? So I just want you to know why we're here. The reason is we have a disinformation campaign against Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, and the Horn of Africa. Listen, the people have waited over 1 year. We gave them a chance thinking that maybe they don't have the information. Maybe they're not doing their work right. Maybe they have journalism ethics. But you know what? The more and more we wait, the more we understand why they do it. Why they won this disinformation campaign. It goes to the highest bidder. It goes to the highest bidder, which makes sense because TPLF has been stealing all this money for the last 30 years. Now they're paying all the local medias, all the mass medias, so that we don't get coverage. So for that reason, the people have said enough is enough.
More.
Enough is enough.
No more.
Enough is enough.
No more.
Okay, I'm gonna pass the mic to you.
Danny said it. We've been dealing with narratives, with lies, with disinformation. We shout and we shout and we shout the truth, and what do we hear back? Say a narrative.
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 What do we say to the narrative? No more.
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 How do you feel about narrative?
No more.
How do you feel about media lies?
No more.
How do you feel about fake news?
No more.
How do you feel about fake news?
No more.
How do you feel about media lies?
No more.
How do you feel about fake news?
No more.
And Cairo came and saw us today. So we're going to say thank you because we are a gracious, loving, and forgiving people. So I say Cairo, you say thank you. Cairo.
Thank you.
Cairo.
Thank you.
Cairo.
Thank you.
Cairo.
Thank you.
And what do we say to Como? Fake news. Como.
Fake news.
Como.
Fake news.
Como.
Fake news.
Did King 5 cover our march last month when we were 5,000 strong? No. So what do we say to King 5?
Fake news.
King 5?
Fake news.
King 5?
Fake news.
Q13 saw our march of 5,000 people, and what did they do? They told us it was a march about the Rittenhouse verdict. So what do we call Q13? Fake news. Fake. That was a mistake.
I think that's a cue so that we can keep on marching. Okay, banderaachun ande awlablubuትና let's keep going. And I'd like to say thank you to Cairo 7. I really appreciate it for coming out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, DJ, let's go.
Tude, I'm going to come to you as we follow this protest in Seattle. A lot of people, I'm sure, are calling you, a leader of the youth. How did you get involved in what's going on in Ethiopia, especially in the NoMore movement? Was it, over time, or was it a moment where you said, I have to be part of this now, I can't watch it anymore? How did that go for you?
Uh-oh.
Is she not in?
I can't hear her.
Oh, I think I accidentally muted when we had some background.
Okay.
Is that better? I apologize. I think so. It goes back quite a ways. I think one thing that keeps coming up is I think as many first generation Ethiopian Americans, I don't really speak very good Amharic, and I don't speak any other Ethiopian languages. I joke that in Amharic it's kind of funny that I speak city Amharic, Yakatama Marinya. I speak the Katama Marinya of a 3-year-old, and then everybody laughs. They think I'm very cute. And in this context where really not just now, but the entirety of TPLF's 30-year reign, they used linguistic division as a way to mask as a way to split up their messaging. It's a very brilliant technique where you talk one way in this language, another way in this language, and another messaging entirely in this language. And in Ethiopia, a nation with so many languages, it becomes very difficult to follow and get a good grasp on what's going on, particularly as the English narrative is so heavily shaped and completely different from the narrative in Tigrinya or the narrative in Amarinya or the narrative in Oromofia. And so for me, it was way back in college when I started, I think for a lot of Ethiopian kids who didn't grow up inside an ethnic ideology, you just kind of learn Ethiopia is a country. I'm from that country. Never colonized. Woo woo. Rastafari. It's great. And then, you exist as an American. And I was really lucky in college. A man named Malcolm Cash, love you forever. He came to teach at Bellevue Community College where I was going to school. African-American brother who was just deeply committed to building community with Ethiopian, Eritrean, Somali youth. And his whole message was, as an African-American, I firmly believe that if this group of people who share so much history, who share so much in common, can learn to live together and love each other, then there's hope for the world. And if the Horn can't do it, then we should probably just all pack up and give up on world peace, because it'll never happen. And at that point, I started particularly learning about why Ethiopia and Eritrea split. Because growing up in an Ethiopian household, the message was, we used to be one country, now we're not one country. TPLF was involved, it's messy, and my parents never wanted to indoctrinate me. My mom is an educator, she takes that very seriously. She always wanted me to learn on my own. So I had to go and learn. Oh, there was a moment where, after the Battle of Adwa, maybe I'm even wrong here, but there was a moment where Eritrea experienced, we had a huge point where our history diverged. And they experienced colonialism with Italy. They fought colonialism with Italy. And at that point, we went into different tracks. And that was the first time I sort of had to go learn Ethiopian history from only English sources. And that's something that I've continued to do since then. And that's a very long answer to your question. And that's how I developed a perspective and developed sort of a skill set for reading between the lines and bringing the cultural context that I have and being able to ask my parents questions. I don't read Amarinya. If I break out my hahu, I can decode Amarinya, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of how I trained myself to be able to consume news about Ethiopia, which is, I think, the first barrier for a lot of people my age, because you don't want to do harm. You don't want to be wrong. And there's so many narratives that say this person's the bad guy or that person's the bad guy. I think Ethiopia, in her speech at the end of yesterday, said, there's an idea of oppression Olympics. And then rather than bringing empathy and compassion and looking at, like, how do we start from shared empathy and then start to design a world and a country that would take care of all of us, we start from our pain and we start from comparing our pain. And so that probably didn't answer your question. The short answer was when the media began to basically say that protecting Amhara and Black expat communities after all the violence that was happening in Shashamene in summer of 2020, that I was, hearing about all of these horrific ethnic violence incidents, these pogroms, and then being like, oh my gosh, is the Ethiopian government gonna do anything about that? And then they would do a tiny thing, and then I'd hear Western media try to use the Prime Minister's Peace Prize as a leash to be like, Nobel Peace Prize Prime Minister is targeting ethnic groups, and then never mention that he's targeting people who were credibly accused of ethnic violence. And that was the point that I was like, something's wrong here, and began asking, learning, and getting involved.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I definitely want to have a conversation about this weaponization of the Nobel Peace Prize. It seems like no one could write an article about Ethiopia without mentioning that the Prime Minister has won the Peace Prize. But to come to you, Jane, real quick, you mentioned to us earlier, you've been involved. I guess you've been marching since Vietnam, but specifically now with what's going on with Nicaragua and Venezuela as well. I think Eritreans are not new to seeing a pattern in, the destabilization of countries the U.S. government tends to do. But for us, for Ethiopians, we're just kind of, getting our bearings in and really trying to understand what the pattern is here. Could you tell us a bit about how you see that pattern playing everywhere in the world, specifically in Ethiopia, as that's what we're talking about today?
Absolutely. Again, I am no expert on Ethiopia, especially what's happening today, but I'm eagerly trying to learn as much as I can. And one of the speakers in the little video you showed was Eugene Puryear, who is identified as a national organizer for Answer. He's also a journalist and with Breakthrough News, and he's done some excellent shows with Rania Kalak that are extremely informative, that I've found extremely helpful in understanding what's going on today. But I think to your question, I'm really glad you asked that question about sort of the pattern of how this goes when there's sort of this regime change or intervention, because it really is a pattern. And I think one of the first things that happens, the term we use for it is demonization. So there is an effort to demonize the other, the country, and especially the leader. So we saw the demonization of Manuel Noriega in Panama. We saw the demonization of Saddam Hussein. We saw the demonization of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, right? So wherever it is. And so, our perspective is to say, we completely reject this demonization. We can, we don't have to agree with, someone doesn't have to be a saint, with a halo over their heads to defend their right, to defend the right of a country to choose their own leaders and to choose their own path on the globe, and to be, Iran too, it's like demonize Iran, demonize, Yugoslavia, demonize whatever the country is. There's always a period of demonization before there is the next step, which might be sanctions. And so some people who should know better will say, oh, well, sanctions are better. It's not as bad as bombing. No, people who die because of sanctions are just as dead as someone who dies because they were hit by a bomb or a drone. Sanctions mean people don't have medicine. And so they die because they might have an easily treated condition, but they don't have the medication. In the 90s in Iraq, we had I was living actually in Michigan at the time, and we had many dear friends who were Arab American. And we were told by some that they had a cousin in Iraq who died of strep throat because they did not have penicillin to treat it. So they died. Their cousin died because of the sanctions. So, we resolutely oppose sanctions. We oppose military intervention. We oppose, I think, what you call proxy war, or paying, funding another organization. So we not directly sending U.S. troops there, but like with the Contras in the 80s in Nicaragua, the U.S. funded the Contras. Even when Congress voted and said they shouldn't do it, there was the famous Contra scandal, right? The Iran Contra scandal, where it was very complicated, but they did this whole thing and they got money from somewhere else and then eventually secretly funded the Contras illegally. So there's this pattern of demonization, maybe sanctions, maybe proxy war, maybe direct war. Now, of course, there's drones. And I think a big part of this, why there's so many different options, right, in that sequence of events, is it goes back to Vietnam. At the beginning of Vietnam War, I think a majority of Americans just kind of went along with the idea. They were told oh, this is to stop communism. Communism is supposed to be this incredibly terrible thing. No one is supposed to question that opposing communism is good, therefore the war is good, therefore we support it. By the end, right, you have millions of Americans going, this is terrible. We should let the Vietnamese people determine their future for themselves. People, you know, so many Vietnamese have died, so many Americans have died. For what? It didn't do anything to improve life in the United States. In fact, it just brought suffering to our country and to Vietnam. And so they actually called it the Vietnam syndrome afterwards. The people who want war called it the Vietnam syndrome, like it was an illness to be against war. And so they realized, and so this is what Tahoot called the weaponization of human rights. They have to be able to say it's for something else. We're going to war because of human rights. And we're going to war because we care about people in Africa. I'm sorry, I don't want to use bad language, but you know, I think you know what I think about that. Something you put on your garden because it makes your plants grow better. And you know, it's not true, right? They're not going to war because they're concerned about human rights. If they were, why does the U.S. support Saudi Arabia? Why do they support Israel, right? Those are documented human rights abusers, but they support them wholeheartedly. The point is that people are not going to support a war if they came out and were dishonest and say, we want the United States to be the dominant world power so that we can control strategic areas and resources for the benefit of, you know, massive U.S.-dominated corporations. Nobody wants to send their son or daughter to die for that. So they say, oh, it's for democracy. Oh, it's for human rights. Oh, we're going to go and help the people in whatever country it is, which is a lie. And so, and we know that when people understand that their enemy is not in Iraq or Afghanistan or Ethiopia, but that, you know, that the struggle that you should really be engaged in is here at home for a better life for the people of, you know, and it's really for everybody, right? We have to do something about climate change. We have to do something in this country about the housing crisis and the healthcare crisis. And that's the struggle we should be engaged in, not a struggle that's going to just kill people in other countries, as well as our sons and daughters and brothers and sisters who are in the U.S. military. So, which then creates more problems. We have the people with the PTSD and who come back from war so damaged physically, mentally, and emotionally, and spiritually. So we have to think about all of that. But that pattern, it starts with the demonization, and then it moves from there to finding the excuses, to find, you know, the weaponizing the human rights or whatever it might be, because you can't make people go to war against that. You have to turn them into the other, right? You have to turn them into the bad guy so that people will feel morally justified in either supporting it or even being the one who's out there pulling the trigger. But that's why we step up and we try to raise an alternative narrative, which is one I was just describing to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think really with the demonization of it, Tahoot could jump in here as well, is we've seen how they write about Ethiopians. It's quite disheartening. It almost feels like, you know, colonization was never over, and, you know, the quote unquote, the white masters could continue to call us savages, right? It just gives them an excuse to demonize. And there was the recent article the New York Times published. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was made darker, like he was many shades darker than who he actually is. And it's just even that racism aspect that they're bringing into the conversation. every little word, that people use in Ethiopia, and instead of looking at it, the context, the cultural context of how we talk about our enemies and terrorists, they choose those words and say, hey, look at them, like this is how they discuss about each other, and really to make it seem like we're just savages that need the intervention of the West to come and save us and better run our country for us. Even like I mentioned earlier, every single article, it just kind of been like a game for me to just look at it and see like how fast are they going to mention the fact that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has a Nobel Peace Prize, and really is that something that he's got, like everything else is defined by that. And in comparison, when we look at Obama winning his Nobel Peace Prize, even in his own speech, he was talking about war. In his own speech, acceptance speech of the Nobel Peace Prize, he was talking about war, right? Because he said we can't solve everything with diplomacy. Some of them, we would have to go to war for. How have you been observing this, Tahut? And Jane could also jump on that.
Well, actually, one of the very first things I did before I started organizing with concerned Ethiopian Americans was just for my own friends, because I think in this narrative, one of the, we talk, like you mentioned, Jane, weaponizing human rights. My mother's biggest point on that is not only is that a gross betrayal of, like in the case here, where at the very first time when the Western media started talking about the Maikadra massacre, first week of this war, I mean, it was days after the TPLF attacked the Northern Command, when they were sure that they were going to blitzkrieg and just win in one fell swoop, they organized a massive ethnic campaign of violence in Maikadra, and Western media blamed the victims. And they said that it happened to Tigrayans, as opposed to Tigrayans perpetrating violence on other ethnicities. And that is a gross betrayal. But the deep betrayal, the thing that makes us fundamentally less safe in the world, period, is destroying the trust around good advocacy and making meaningless these words like genocide, these words like human rights. I never in my life thought I would be regularly called a genocide denier. I never, ever expected to have to bravely walk into that. And it's a tool to cower, to make people cower and to make people afraid and to make them unwilling to walk into a conversation. And so the very first thing I had to do was put together a media literacy document for my own friends and family, because I was showing up at work saying the TPLF is doing this. And, my mother had been working inside Ethiopia, from the fringes, advocating against TPLF my whole life. So hearing that this organization that, intentionally pushed cholera, or didn't label cholera epidemics, called it watery diarrhea to intentionally kill people. This organization that was quite credibly accused of sterilizing women under the guise of forced vaccinations. That this organization, hearing that they were the victims, immediately set off triggers for me. And so I just started putting the document together for my American friends, being like, if you read an article that doesn't talk clearly, or is it all wishy-washy about how this war started, if you read an article that highlights ethnic violence against one group of people in Ethiopia but doesn't talk about the others, because heartbreakingly, during this period in Ethiopia, people were killing people broadly. And it was, if you were going to say that it happened here and you didn't talk about it happening here, that was likely going to be a narrative. Another thing I encouraged people to look at was whether an article took a view of a broad historical context. Is this an article that only discusses a tiny segment of time? Because if it does, it's probably cherry picking, because this conflict is really in its fourth year. The minute Abiy Ahmed became president of Ethiopia, TPLF went into terrorism mode. They began the bombings, they began the assassinations, they began the coup attempts. So if you're reading a article from The Economist or from Foreign Policy or from the New York Times, and it's only talking about a tiny window or it's selectively covering that window. I stopped reading Declan Walsh's pieces, so I don't know what his latest said. But if he talked about how the government was organizing to head off the TPLF, and it didn't talk about how TPLF was in an out insurrection from 2019, if not 2018 onward, then we know we're dealing with a propaganda piece. And I think that, again, for English language speakers, you're really limited. Burkina is an Ethiopian news source that's in English. There's a few others. And what I encourage people to do who don't speak African languages is to read all your Western news and then seek out every piece of English language Ethiopian news you can, and use what's between your ears. We have to critically think and piece things together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in that narrative as well is how they are constantly obsessed with mentioning how Tigray is a minority in Ethiopia and being attacked, but they completely omit the fact that TPLF has led Ethiopia for 27 years, was in power in Ethiopia for 27 years. So for a minority group, right, and systematically ruled, most of them were Tigrayans, right? And for a minority group that is supposed to be facing a genocide and just, like imminent threats, how do you not then mention at the same time that they've led Ethiopia for 27 years? That shows you that Ethiopians don't have an issue with this minority group leading or not leading, let alone whether you want to live or not is not part of even the discussion that we've ever had. It's just really being interesting for me to just kind of like, why do you mention one thing and omit another one as well? Jane, if you could jump in there as well.
Absolutely. What really resonated with me, Tahoot, was when you talked about, people are all of a sudden, I mean, it's shocking, but it's also so typical that you're now a genocide denier or something like that. I mean, that's a very harsh, beyond harsh thing to say to somebody.
Yeah.
And I think, I've had something along those lines happen to me so many times of, being accused of supporting or defending or rationalizing all kinds of, in that demonization process, right? So that when a country or a leader is being demonized and my organization is saying, hands off that country, don't intervene in that country, like what Tahoot said, American solutions to American problems, African solutions to African problems. And people come back and go, well, did you know that, Saddam Hussein did X, Y, or Z? And it's like, you're not hearing me, you're not hearing what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like, a vaccine, right? You get a little dose of something bad and actually it makes you stronger in the long run. So I try not to be bothered by it because I know that when you speak truth to power, when you stand up, when it looks like, everybody, so-called everybody thinks a certain way, but you don't think that way and your organization doesn't think that way. But then, you know what? A little while later, people come to realize that maybe that war wasn't so good. Maybe that war was terrible and they wish they'd spoken up sooner against it. So, and then not that they all come running back and go, oh, you were right. No, that doesn't usually happen.
Yeah.
My mother did do that once. She came back and told me I was right about something. I was very grateful to her. But generally, it does not happen. But, I go to bed, I sleep well, right? Because I know that, I am speaking truth to power, that we are speaking truth to power. And that means that sometimes there's going to be times when it appears that we are speaking, only a small isolated group of people are speaking, but other times it is clear that is not the case. So we have to not allow ourselves to be intimidated or shut down by sometimes the most outlandish accusations against people who are only standing up for what we know to be the truth and for what we know to be the right thing.
I love that. Let's watch a few minutes of the protests as well. And I want to come back to how do we stay true to power in a sense? There are a few people that asked me yesterday if I was an activist, and that just kind of like threw me off. And I want to have that discussion with you guys after a few minutes. But, can you guys hear me?
Now I can.
Okay, perfect. So yesterday, something that threw me off, like I said, people were asking me if I was an activist. And for me, I did not know how to quite answer that question, because I think there's also that understanding of now, because the news media is not doing the job that they're supposed to be doing and telling us the truth, everybody's telling the truth or trying to tell the truth. Does that automatically make us an activist, or is there a reason why, maybe from what you've seen and your experience in the long haul of this struggle, that word just kind of didn't sit well with me, and I wasn't sure why. Jane, if you could start on that, and then Timothy could add as well.
Sure. Well, before we went live, I think we were having a little bit of a conversation about this, and I did not know that within the Ethiopian context that activist had a very more of a negative connotation. As a person from this country, sadly mostly monolingual, when I think of the word activist, I think of like a civil rights activist. I think of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I think of union organizers, and I think of peace activists. So that's what activist means to me. And so, yes, I'm proud to be an activist, and I'm proud to be an organizer. But that's, it's really true. There's not a single meaning for every word, and that words have different meanings, and the same word has a different meaning in a different context. So, advocate, organizer, all of those words are kind of synonymous. And I think that it is important. I think, to me, the most important part is that we not just be lonely voices in the wilderness, but that we find our extended family, if you will, of so that we're not. I'm trying to think of the verse where it talks about you don't want the branches need to be together on the tree with each other, right? You don't want to be. You're not going to survive if you're just out by yourself. You need to be together with like-minded people, because then also we're so much more powerful. I mean, just that example from yesterday of being at Cairo in our multitudes and calling them, and they come out and they interview us, and it went on television and people heard our message. Yes. Daniel sent me a little video. Somebody videotaped it, filmed it off their television. We can't find a link on the website, but it did air on television. That scenario when we were down there in front of the TV station. So it worked. It worked. And there's so much more that we can accomplish when we unite, when we work together. I mean, I've been on, when I kept on watching that little video that was put together of the demonstrations, I mean, I was just almost in tears, just so moved by it, because it just exemplifies that idea that, you know, united we are strong, but when divided or alone, we are very weak. So that's kind of a fundamental concept of organizing, is to bring people together, and that together we are so much more powerful than when we are operating as individuals.
Yeah. Thank you. And Suhut, how have you observed our use of activism or activists, and do you consider yourself one as well? You might be muted.
You'd think after 2 years of life on Zoom, we'd all be better at this. I apologize. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think I have to, like Jane said, kind of proudly pick that up. And I think as Ethiopians and Ethiopian Americans, even, this is what I was saying before the show, I always joke with my friends that I'm much more cautious than most of my American friends, because I was raised by two people who lived through a revolution. And that has, you know, in our second homes, those of us whose families fled either the Derg or Wayane when it came into power, we've hewn to the middle, because we've seen that, I forgot where it was. My mom was telling me a story about a man on an Ethiopian media who talked about hiding the first communist activists who were fighting against Haile Selassie, when they came to his little village house and they told him, we're going to give you land, we're going to make you free. And he hid them, because he was like, this is amazing, things are going to get better. And Ethiopia is a country where again and again and again, we've had people who believed in something bigger, better, more beautiful, commit themselves as activists to something bigger, better, and more beautiful. And because they chose a violent struggle, and because they chose an othering struggle, it was easily co-opted into something horrific. And so we've had 60 years of trauma in that. And so I think like Jane was saying, the word activist, so many Ethiopian parents, I think, are like, CNN, Joe Biden, pick the middle path, because they're afraid of either extreme. And so there's my either edge. And so, yes, I'm an activist. It's something, I think in the past, I've always been a donator, a pontificator, a small scale helper, because I was of the belief that the first time I ever marched was actually against the Iraq war. And it was until very, very recently, this last 2 years, the last time I marched, because what I learned was, without a superpower for us to oppose, the United States really stopped caring about what the citizens said. During the Cold War, we pretended to want to be a liberal democracy so that we could draw people away from communism. And in the 1990s, when that ended, we began our rapid lurch to the right, and our rapid, shedding of labor rights, and shedding of voter rights, and shedding of being a society that says we're better. We want you to choose us. We became a society that said, ha, you have no other choice. And these last few years, I think we've all, in my generation, activism is something that we're all really proud to pick up. And I'm very excited to see our entire community as a multi-generational community stay here and stay in this place where we're bringing and I really loved what Ethiopia said. Ethiopia Berta, she's an organizer out of DC, who gave a really moving speech at the end of our rally yesterday. And she talked about radical empathy, and she talked about, loving each other so that other people will respect us. And I hope that as I'm a person of faith, firmly stand in the belief that God will deliver Ethiopia, and that he didn't carry us this far to have it all fall apart on any one person's shoulders. But as we traverse this, that our community, particularly the Ethiopian American community, stays standing in solidarity and becomes a community that says, we are going to push our country towards the things that, like Jane said, every human being wants, and the things that our American country says it stands for. And I'm firmly in the belief that the mistakes of the Cold War gave America the blessing of a truly multi-ethnic democracy where we have a 21st century advantage that no other country in the world has. You want to do business in India? Great. You have India experts that love and have loyalty to your country. You want to do business in Sudan? Wonderful. You have Sudanese experts who have deep relations and connections to Sudan. We don't have to bully our way into global markets the way we did the last time we were competing on the world stage. We're family with the whole world as the United States. That could be our foreign policy. We could be the whole world's family, and it sounds so airy-fairy and a pie in the sky. But to me, that's what the No More movement really is. We're saying, as Americans, we love Ethiopia. We love Eritrea. We love them like our family. And, you know, Europe, much more than the United States, has extractive interests in Africa. The United States, our presence in this conflict, it's not a resource extraction. It's like Jane said, it's about hegemony. And we can have hegemony as influence. America can influence the rest of the world through real love, like real family love. It feels like a crazy thing, but the foundation is actually there.
Yeah. I think it's something that we always forget. Like for me, living in America, one of the most beautiful things is the diversity, right? I could literally meet anyone from anywhere in the world and have a genuine conversation with them, learn about their culture, their language and such. And I don't necessarily know how many countries allow for that flexibility. And having all that as using all that and having all that as a resource is, like you said, much more safer for the rest of the world and much more safer for us as Americans and also as Ethiopians and Eritreans and any country we might be from, and leading a foreign policy and leading a friendship policy and leading a trade policy that doesn't come from bullying, that doesn't come from, you know, zero sum where we are the only option I have, so I have to go with you necessarily, but I want to do this, right? As American Ethiopian, I want to go anywhere in the world and be able to conduct business, but I don't want to carry the badge of bullying countries into submission as part of my identity because the foreign policy is conducted by an imperialists. I don't want to use bad words here, but really nonsensical folks that can't think past the immediacy or can't think past their grandiosity of how they want the rest of the world to see America as. I want us to jump into, I know you mentioned a few times, to jump into some of the speeches that we had yesterday. But before that, Jane, like I had the same reaction when I watched that video. I'm going to show it again. I was just so emotional at how beautiful it was, how unique it was, at least for us as Ethiopian Americans, being able to stand together and say, we don't want this to happen anymore. And it was so beautiful even more because it wasn't even anti-American, even though, right, the United States government is doing everything it can to, at least we believe, trying to destroy our land and divide it up and prolong a war. We still identify ourselves as American because this is a great country that we live in. And that's something that in all of the protests that I've seen, and I really appreciate that. So I want to share that video and some of the speeches from yesterday, and we'll continue our conversation.
I would like to say thank you.
You're broken down and tired.
For the whole year, the narrative was a false narrative. It was all about TPLF. The people that were committing the crime were being seen as victims. And the victims that were being killed, massacred, like these names that you're holding from my cadre, were being seen as the aggressors.
We go walk it out.
We in the Black Alliance for Peace stand in uncompromising opposition to the U.S.-led imperialist aggression against Ethiopia and by extension against her neighboring countries, Eritrea, Somalia, and beyond. The U.S. military is not welcome in Africa.
policy has actually been very consistent for the last 40 years when it comes to the Horn of Africa. Keep them divided.
No more. No more.
We will not scapegoat you. We will not start another war. We should not do so.
When will these women find justice? When will these poor people find peace?
Hands up, Ethiopia! Hands up, Ethiopia! Hands up, Eritrea! Hands up, Eritrea!
The U.S. government is wrong. The European governments are wrong. CNN is wrong. All of them have turned these pernicious lies about what's happening into Ethiopia into yet another regime change operation.
Who wants freedom for Africans?
Ethiopia!
Who has defeated invaders for generations?
Ethiopia!
The people united will never be defeated.
Biden administration!
Biden administration!
Stop the war on Ethiopia!
We are Ethiopia!
Free nations!
ሱዳናውያን፣ አፍሪካውያን፣ ናይጄሪያ፣ ኬንያ፣ ሌሎችም እየቆሙ ነው ያሉ። ኖሞር እያለ ያለው ኢትዮጵያዊ ብቻ አይደለም አፍሪካዊም ነው።
Ethiopia!
Ethiopia! Ethiopia! Ethiopia! When do we want it?
Now!
When do we want it?
Now!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
TPLF!
TPLF!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No more!
I would like to say, your turnout is amazing. I know it's a work week. I know it's cold. I really, really appreciate taking the time off to come here and participate in this. Like we said, our fight will continue. Last month, I sat down here and I passed a message for the federal building, for the representatives. This is where your senators stay, right? And so I wrote them letters. I reached out to them. I did everything in my power to get them to hear us. But guess what? Because we're not united, because we're scattered around, because we're not registered to vote, they don't care about us. Politicians are all about votes. You need to understand that. So when we rally, what we're doing here, it's not really, they don't really care. And that's the honest truth. But we care. We care. We care. We are here on behalf of all the people that are suffering back home. Think about them. At the hands of TPLF. When is it gonna stop? When are our representatives never respond to us? Adam Smith, Jayapal, Strickland. I sent them letters after letters. We called them again and again. But guess what? We sent them the invite. The only person that was gracious enough to tell me that Adam Smith won't be here because his father-in-law passed away was his deputy. You know, we opened that channel. But unless we register to vote, these people would not listen to us. These people would not respect us. But guess what? With this effort, what we started, especially with the young generation, again, the young generation needs to get involved. This is our time. We have started a movement, and it's not going to stop. I promise you, I guarantee you, I'm going to see it through. I'm going to lead it like we've led all the marches, all the rallies. We're not going to sit idle. Enough is enough. Our people have been silenced. We've been sitting idle. Just, it's not that we're scared, but we're gracious. We're gracious. We're people of love. We thought that love would solve everything. I'm a firm believer that it does. But the fact of the matter is, these people will not listen to you unless you actually do something about it. Change your representatives. If they don't listen to us, what are we going to do? We're going to change our representatives. Can you say it with me? When I say what are we going to do? You're going to say, we're going to vote. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Yes, we are going to vote, and we will make sure that we get a seat at the table. Not just, all the donors that pay the money. We also pay the money. We get taxed every single day from our properties, from the food that we eat, from everything. So don't play us. Just because we're Africans doesn't mean we're stupid. We're actually very, very smart. But like I said, we're gracious. But when you test us, we don't play around. We do not play around. And we never give up. So when you see us today, just know that this is not the last one. As I said last month, I will be back with all of you, united even bigger. Think about it. Look around you. This is on a Tuesday, on a work week. Can you imagine if this was Sunday, if this was Saturday? Think about it for a second. Thank you for coming out, for helping your countries. So now we're going to go, thank you. I really appreciate it. And we're going to start off with Answer Coalition. So Answer Coalition has been here with us, helping us with the legal observers, with securities, with a lot of things. And so I'm going to pass the mic to Dalen Sommer. Did I say it right? I apologize if I didn't. All right. Thank you so much. Here you go.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Dalen, and I'm here today representing the Answer Coalition as we stand together in solidarity with our Ethiopian and Eritrean brothers and sisters and say, hands off Ethiopia! Hands off Ethiopia! Hands off Eritrea! Hands off Eritrea! And we say no more! No more to U.S. imperialist intervention, sanctions, and more! No more! No more! And we say yes to the freedom and independence of the sovereign Ethiopian and Eritrean peoples to determine their own destinies. Here at Answer Coalition, we have stood since 2001 in opposition to the U.S. imperialist military-industrial complex and its plans to dominate and exploit the planet. We oppose the disastrous U.S. war on Afghanistan. We oppose the genocidal U.S. war on Iraq. We've opposed U.S. imperialist intervention in Syria, Libya, and Yemen. And we continue to oppose U.S. imperialism in the Horn of Africa, too. We reject the racist slanders spewed by the mainstream corporate media designed to demonize the Ethiopian and Eritrean people while whitewashing the crimes of U.S.-backed terrorists. We reject the bloody bipartisan lies coming from the State Department, the Pentagon, and Capitol Hill designed to justify U.S. imperialist war and sanctions. We've seen all this before, and we know better. We at Answer Coalition believe that every nation on this planet has the unalienable right to determine its own destiny, free of coercive threats, be they military or financial. The United States has no right to intervene in Ethiopia and Eritrea's internal affairs. The United States has no right to fund terrorism and destabilizing warfare in the Horn of Africa. We say no to neo-colonialism. No more. Ethiopians and Eritreans alone must be allowed to develop their own nations, completely free of outside interference. The right to build infrastructure, roads, schools, hospitals, and live in peace and basic human dignity just like anybody else. We love you, we stand with you, and we will never abandon you. live Ethiopia! Long live Eritrea! Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Now, Gurmai, if you could bless us with the Eritrean poem.
سلام بعد حمصكم. No more. No more. Biden administration. Say that. Biden administration. No more supporting. TPLF terrorist group. Okay. አይበልናንዶ ንልዕሊ 20 ዓመታት ንሰላምና ተፀውዐ ነትእዝኑ ዝለኮተ ከምዛ ዘይሰምዐ ሰሓቐርና ኣፍሪቃ ሰብ መሰል ኣምዐ ንሓቂ ጠሊሙ ህዝብታት ዘግድዐ ሃገር ብዓበያ ንስለ ጅብኡ ዝኸድዐ ሃገረ ኢትዮጵያ ንስለ ጅብኡ ዝኸድዐ ብታህዲድን ጉራን ዝፍለጥ መትከሉ ድዐ በሉ ስምዕለይ ልመና ሎሚ ምስተረትዐ ኣይበላን ዲናር ሰላም ይሓይሽ ግደፉ ንባዕዲ ኣሚንኩም ቀይሕ መስመራይ ትሕለፉ ብጃህራም ፈኸራን እንዳዕኮት ምስተንከፉ ህድማ ንቕድሚት ኮይና ርእሳታቱ እናገደፉ ህድማ ንቕድሚት ኮይና ርእሳታቱ ገዲፉ ንስቶምን ተንኮሎምን ንዘለዓለም ክጓሓፉ ኣይበላንዶ ኣይበልናን ዲና ንፋለጥ ኢና ትማሊብ ትመዋእለ ገድሊ ንሕና ባዕልና ኢና ኣይለወጥናን ምስሊ ንሕና ባዕልና ኢና ኣይለወጥናን ምስሊ ቅድሚ ምዝላልኩም ንኽትሓስቡ ብዓቕሊ ምኽሪ ተለግስልኩም ካብ ወድና ኣቕፋ መስተውዓሊ ንስለዛ ንሳያ ዘላ ይተቐየረት እንታ ሻዕብያዊት ሓኽሊ እታ በትረ ሓቂ ዘይተዓርግ ዘይትበሊ እወ ኣይበልናን ዲና ኣይነገርናን ሰላም ግበሩ ኢልናኩም ይትረፍኩም ዕብዳን መንገዲ ዝጊ ሓዙ ይጽንሓልኩም ስራሕ ሸይጣን መጸለል ምስ መረፅኩም ዓመፅን ጎበጣን ኣብታ ዘይብልኩም ካዕቦ ተህዲድ ድሮናን ሓፍኮፍ ምስ በዝሐ ሓቂ ንምሽፋን ብዘይካ ምድካርኩም ምርጫ ይነበረና ኣይበልናዮን ዲና ንለኣኽና ኸዳምን ይትረፍካ ካብ ምስ ግብረ ሽበራውያን ምስ ሰብ ሓቂ ይሕሸካ ካብ ምስ ሓደ ጉጅለ ምስ ዓባይ ኢትዮጵያ ይሕሸካ ካብ ምስ ዓመፅቲ ውሑዳን ኣፍሪቃ ተዋፅኣካ እሞ ሕጂ ዶዳ የሓይሽ حفت تقول بيبكا دك أصليتي مسعان كشفن كفاتكا وحد قبل كاوردس مسمار حويسكا قم نجر ترخيبو بشفان سبعوي مسلات عودة خينات كتوفر قلعو عشلات بمنافع حصوت كتتعلل الزبزات بحوين نكاس الكا حزباوي تكالات أمان هو وسيتنا يزهو لسحتت أبطفعتك تزازيمو قبعة مريت أفكساتك وعلا زدت لخيا سحلت أيبلاندو هزبي كوني كما سارحين سيكي أمريت عسبي يبلون أف سمايون صدقي وطم يترفن أي تفعات مسلا سوري برئسان تتقابرات بإقرايات وزع حقي إذا هزبي فتوني وحاوي كوركي صفعت مستجمرة يذكر دي وعرقي نبل ذي نبرناني أكل عبللا بحكي بحوي صوتا قدفونا يتفعات بايلا وطم يترفكم يتفعات مسلا نعم الله قد يفكانا فرنجي مهللا إنه دماي وزدكا نفس المات تخيلا زريات علوني عايزة أرقى ميلا نو مور جنتا جعيزة تغليلا نو مور جنتا جعيزة تغليلا دحري ناخد در يلا ندردر دحري الرب يلا نرب دحري سعرات يلا عود دحري موت عيركبني هوال بجيم اوفر كان بعد موت بنو مور تزازيمو فتحات ባይ ባይ ጁንታ ፈትንዮ ጥፋት ባይ ባይ አሸባሪ የዋርስኪ መንግስተ ኃጢአት ባይ ባይ ቴሮሪስት ግሩፕ የዋርስኪ መንግስተ ኃጢአት No more! No more! No more! Ertra prevails! Ertra prevails! Ethiopia prevails! Ethiopia prevails! The Horn of Africa prevails! ክብርን መጎስን ስዋዕትና ዓወት ንሓፋሽ
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gurmai. አቶ ሲሳይ ወደዚህ አንድ ግጥም ያነብልንና በአማርኛ ከዛ በኋላ ወደ ዋናው ኖ ሞር ስፒች እንሄዳለን። አቶ ሲሳይ
በቃ ኦሮማይ ያክል ኦልራይት ኦኬ በቃ በኢትዮጵያ በቃ በኢትዮጵያ የሰው ዘር መብቀያ ኦሮማይ በሊ ኤርትራ እጅ ለእጅ ተያይዘን እንጓዝ በጋራ ኖሞር በአፍሪካ ኖሞር በአፍሪካ ህዝብሽ አይነካ ሀብትሽ አይነካ ጥቁር ሰው ነን እኛ ለጠላቶች መጋኛ ለወዳጆች ማኛ የሰው አንፈልግም የእኛንም አንሰጥም የሰው ጋርም አንደርስም በቀጥታ ሆነ በተዘዋዋሪ እምቢ አንገዛም በውክልና ጦርነት ክንዳችን አይዝልም በሐሰት ውንጀላ ወያኔ አትድን ባላግባብ እቀባም ድሆች አንሆን አጃይ ኤርትራዬ ፋሳ አፍሪካዬ አይዞሽ ኢትዮጵያዬ ጉስቁልና ሸልፋል ጊዜ ወንፊት ሆኖ ገለባው ይቀራል እውነትና ንጋት እያደር ይጠራል ወያኔም ይቀስማል አበባሽ ያብባል ፍሬሽም ይፈካል አይዞሽ ኢትዮጵያዬ አይዞሽ ኤርትራዬ ፋሳ አፍሪካዬ ከልዩነት ቀንበር ከከፈለን ደንበር ካጠሩብን አጥር ከሚወጋን ስንጥር ከተፈናቀለው ከዚያ መንደር ተምጦ ይወለዳል ፍቅር ከፈጠራ ታሪክ ከጥላቻ ሰደድ እንዳንለማ እንዳናድግ ከተዘጋው መንገድ ከተሳለው ካራ አንዱን ለማረድ አምጠሽ ተጨንቀሽ ይወለዳል መውደድ ክፉም ይቀበራል እንደ ጨው ይሟሟል እውነት ያሸንፋል አፍሪካ የማየ ትንሣኤሽ መጣ በቃ በኤርትራ ኖሞር በአፍሪካ በቃ በኢትዮጵያ የሰው ዘር መብቀያ የሰው ዘር መብቀያ በቃ በአፍሪካ ጥቁር አይነካ ሀብትሽ አይነካ ክብርሽ አይነካ በቃ በአፍሪካ አመሰግናለሁ
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're broken down and tired.
For the whole year, the narrative was a false narrative. It was all about TPLF. The people that were committing the crime were being seen as victims. And the victims that were being killed, massacred, like these names that you're holding from my cadre, were being seen as the aggressors.
We go walk it out.
We in the Black Alliance for Peace stand in uncompromising opposition to the U.S.-led imperialist aggression against Ethiopia and by extension against our neighboring countries, Eritrea, Somalia, and beyond.
The U.S. military is not welcome in Africa.
has actually been very consistent for the last 40 years when it comes to the Horn of Africa. Keep them divided.
No more. No more. No more.
We will not scapegoat you. We will not start another war. We should not do so.
When will these women find justice? When will these poor people find peace?
Hands up, Ethiopia! Hands up, Ethiopia! Hands up, Eritrea! Hands up, Eritrea!
The U.S. government is wrong. The European governments are wrong. CNN is wrong. All of them have turned these pernicious lies about what's happening into Ethiopia into yet another regime change operation.
Who wants freedom for Africans?
Ethiopia.
Who has defeated invaders for generations?
Ethiopia.
The people united will never be defeated.
Biden administration!
Biden administration.
Stop the war on Ethiopia!
On Ethiopia.
We are Ethiopia! Three nations!
ሱዳናውያን፣ አፍሪካውያን፣ ናይጄሪያ፣ ኬንያ፣ ሌሎችም እየቆሙ ነው ያሉ። ኖሞር እያለ ያለው ኢትዮጵያዊ ብቻ አይደለም አፍሪካዊም ነው።
ኢትዮጵያ!
ኢትዮጵያ! ኢትዮጵያ! ኢትዮጵያ!
When do we want it?
No!
When do we want it?
No!
No more!
No more!
No more!
No
No
more!
more!
No more!
TPLF!
No more!
We need to be very mindful of our rights. When we live here, we have a voice. In order to have a voice, like I was telling you earlier, you have to scan that QR code. So, if you haven't yet, please do so. We will share it with the Ethiopian Community Center as well as the Eritrean Community Center. We both have different ways of collecting that information, but what we'll do is we'll combine it together and bring in all the force so that fundraising going on. I know there are so many different fundraising. I know you've given so much minutes, but it's by Ethiopia. So Ethiopia, if you could come over and just give us.
All right. Well, first I want to say thank you to Daniel, Tahut, and all of the organizers. Andalai, can you guys just give them a round of applause because they've been working very hard to organize. So thank you guys for letting us.
And then let us, yes.
Shall we? I'm here to represent the no longer silent majority. The countless Eritreans and Ethiopians that empathize with every single innocent life that has been lost at the hands of this ongoing systemic conflict. We choose to be on the right side of history and humanity. We are here for the people, not for the politics. And no human should suffer solely based on their identity. We choose to not engage in what the global media is perpetuating, which is this concept of oppression Olympics in the Horn of Africa. Because oppression is not a competition. It's not. When one tribe hurts, we should all feel this pain. When even one small African nation is suffering, we should all suffer. When one person is experiencing pain, we all experience that pain. And it absolutely saddens me to see how we continue to gaslight and amplify one suffering over another. So this is a call to action. Similar to what Tahut was saying, we need to actually have action behind this. So I'm asking everyone here today who has ever cared about humanity, who has ever cared about Ethiopia, who has ever cared about Black liberation and Black history and African history, if you are telling yourself that this is not your fight, and this is for people outside of our community as well, if you're telling yourself that this is not your fight, that this is not directly affecting you, that your voice is not valid, that this isn't the time to watch, that this is not your fight, this is not the time to watch on the sidelines while history plays out. I ask you today, and I ask everyone here today, And I really want you to ask yourself this. What will you tell your children and future generations to come? What are we teaching them with our actions now and with our words? What will our nation's legacy be? What will Ethiopia's legacy be? Will it be bloodshed or will it be peace? Will we advocate for the innocent or will we ignore their agony? Will we teach our kids to love or hate their identity? What are we teaching our children? If you are deliberately choosing not to inform yourselves of this multifaceted issue, then you too are a part of the problem. If you're gaslighting one another's plight and pain, you are a part of the problem. We need you to be a part of the solution. Please get educated, show unwavering empathy, and get involved. And get involved by supporting in whichever way you feel. Like how everyone came today, this is just one of many ways you can be involved. Please make sure you're meeting with your local leaders and organizers so that you can get involved in local politics. Because we need to punish them at the polls. And this is not even in the speech, I'm going off script. You need to punish these politicians at the polls. So if you don't vote, they don't hear you. And if you're not voting and they're not hearing you, then the message will not be received. So please make sure you are meeting with local leaders, organizers, connect with your community and ensure you are utilizing your voting power in local elections, because we need leaders who are directly responsive to our immediate needs and not those who pander to our communities and aesthetics and votes. Because a lot of politicians are going to give us what we want to hear then and forget about us when it matters. We are gathered here to simply say no more to the pain, no more oppression Olympics, no more misinformation, no more neocolonialism, no more ethnic violence that continues to plague our people, no more being defined by our deficits, no more to the pain and to the poverty, no more to the war, no more to the trademark and the hate that has scarred Ethiopia and Ertra for decades. We are more than our wars. We are more than our famines. We are kings, we are queens, we are leaders, we are global pioneers. And ethnic federalism is divisive and destructive, and it's why we are here today. It has harmed our people more than it has helped our people. Ethnic federalism is our enemy, not one another. We must love each other unconditionally before we can demand others to respect us. We have to love each other first before we demand others to respect us. We must love each other unequivocally and boldly before we demand respect from other people. I challenge everyone here today to treat and uplift each other's diverse differences in a way that shifts our global narrative as Ethiopians. Our internal conflicts is what invites foreign intervention because we are constantly at war with ourselves.
That's right, yes.
This is not acceptable. This is not who we are. This is not what Ethiopia is synonymous with. This is not our trademark. This is not our hallmark. We must reject ethnic federalism. We must reject ethnic-based violence once and for all. Your tribe should not validate your existence or your humanity. It is barbaric, it is belittling, and it is beneath us. We have to ultimately decide as a people when we treat each other with respect and dignity. The world will see Ethiopia for what she truly can be one day, which is a beacon of hope, history, power, and peace and love. In the Bible, Psalm 68:31 says, "Princes shall soon stretch out to Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God." Ethiopia right now is in pain. Ethiopia right now is crying. And she is crying out for peace, and she is stretching out her hands now more than ever. So I'm asking everyone here today, one simple step is consider donating to the iZone organization. consider donating to the One Bag Challenge and help us rebuild Ethiopia one day at a time. Let us love each other in faith, and may God bless you, may God bless Ertra, may God bless Ethiopia, and may God bless these United States. Thank you guys for coming.
So what do we
I think you were muted now.
I know. The Zoom thing. I just wanted to show everyone the last few speeches that we had. I think we covered pretty much everything except to who's your speech. Since we already have you here, you could give us the tidbits about what you were speaking of. But Jane, to come to you,
ሰንደቅሽ ከፍ ይበል ይቁም ለዘላለም ሰላም ጥጋብ ደስታ ይታይብሻለም እማማ ሴራው ይክሸፍበት እማማ የመጣብሽ አድማ እማማ እግሩን ሳር ያድርገው ጉልበቱን ቀጤማ እማማ ካቀባበለብሽ እማማ ብረት ከደገነ አምላክ ያግዝልሽ ላንቺ የወገነ ጸሎትሽ ይሰማ አምላክ ይለመንሽ ፈተናው አይለቅ የሚፈታተንሽ አንገትሽ ራስሽን ሲኖር ይሁና ማግስቱን ይውሰደኝ አስር ሞት ይምጣና ኢትዮጵያ ለዘላለም ከፍ ትበል። እወዳችኋለሁ። አመሰግናለሁ።
apologies for the low tech difficulties we just had. I think my sound just dropped out on me. For those of you that are just joining us or been with us, we were just covering the Seattle NoMore protest yesterday and how that whole fits, especially the NoMore movement fits into the global context of fighting imperialism. Please go ahead and share and like this conversation for your loved ones that might like to be part of this movement or learn a bit about what's going on in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the Horn of Africa in general. I don't know how much of my question y'all heard, so I'm gonna go ahead and repeat it. Mostly for Jane. With the NoMore movement being as big as it's getting, especially a lot more Ethiopians, Eritreans, and also on social media, on Twitter, that as we've seen, how does that fit into other movements that you've witnessed, especially anti-imperialist movements you've witnessed? The successes and also the downfall, if there is any that you've seen.
We need to work to for ourselves as the Answer Coalition, and really speaking for myself, I think we really need to work in our communities, to educate people about what's going on. Obviously, there are resources, English language resources that can be shared. Dahoud, I'd love to get your media literacy guide so that we can study that. But also, just in organizing for this demonstration, I ran into some people from other organizations that were misinformed and confused. And we had to set them straight as to what this movement is actually about, which should be completely unobjectionable to anybody who says they are against U.S. intervention and U.S. war. There's never any good that comes out of the U.S. inserting itself into a tragic situation, even if there are human rights violations, regardless of who's committing them, having the United States militarily intervene or impose sanctions is not going to make it any better. And so we need to work to educate people in a very popular way. And I really think that connecting it to this idea of forever wars is something that will link that for people, because after nearly 20 years, right, of a forever war, people are sick of it, and they are much more likely, I think, to respond to that idea that this is another forever war that is being pushed, and not on our watch. Like, this can't happen. And the U.S., the military-industrial complex, the Pentagon, they've been eyeing Africa. They have their AFRICOM, their Horn of Africa strategy. It's all very terrible, and yet it's been something that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. And so I think that's something that we need to do, is to get the word out to as many people as possible, including, honestly, what we call the choir, right? The people who should be in the choir, who need to be. Sometimes you have to educate the choir before you can start taking your message out beyond that. So I think that's the marching orders that I get out of this experience, is that we need to help educate more people and have them understand that this is very similar to, in many ways, not in the particulars of what's happening in Ethiopia, but in terms of this kind of big picture of this, the demonization, that we need to help to educate people, and that this is not going to happen instantly, that this is going to be a process, and it's going to be an ongoing process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this being also, I think the Ethiopia narrative, Ethiopia is the biggest country, the imperialist wing of the US government is picking on per se. So we've been able to voice our concerns a lot more effectively, because also there's so many of us out here and in Europe as well, to just continue to keep our elected officials accountable, to be able to march, to be able to ask for meetings and have those dialogues that we need to. We've been able, to a certain extent, to keep the imperialist ideas at bay. But Tuhud, if you can add on to this, I don't want there to be a sense of, okay, we've won this, and we've accomplished what we want to accomplish. The chances of, the US troops being deported or sent to Ethiopia might seem slim right now. But could you speak on us making sure to continue this conversation or this fight, not necessarily only Ethiopian centered, but in the global sense as well? Because this movement, if anything, has taught me personally that our struggle is everybody's struggle. Just like Jane was saying earlier, it's not just about Ethiopia. It's not just about Eritrea. It should be about what we see, the injustices that are happening across the world.
Absolutely, because as Americans, and I speak as somebody who, my heart is in Ethiopia, or my heart is with Ethiopia, but my heart is also very much here. This is definitely where I'm going to die. This is my home. Well, hopefully, this is where I get to die. I mean, over the last 5 years, I think particularly my generation of first generation Ethiopian Americans, we were looking for where am I going to go, because we were told we might not be able to die here. We might not be safe here. And that struggle of a world where people are constantly at the effect of something else more powerful, instead of having that organizing ability to chart the course where they are. If we're, my mom is a preschool teacher, and we tell the children, if I hurt you, I give you permission to hurt me. And as a nation, we experienced what external destabilization feels like over the last 6 years. And if that can't raise our consciousness as an American population, if that can't elevate our compassion with the people of Venezuela, the people of Uruguay, as they were dealing with the US trying to push a coup there, to give access to cobalt. I mean, there's a whole world of strategic resources that that climate change has sort of made infinitely more valuable. Countries that were able to fly under the radar, and maybe they dealt with a little bit of light imperialism, but they were never the focus of not just US. I mean, it's strong nations the world over. When World War II ended, we, as the United States, made an agreement with Europe about how we would divide the economic prize. And the Cold War was about Russia disagreeing and wanting, I mean, that's these big powers fighting for marbles. And as Ethiopians, if we want to see Ethiopia be able to chart its own course, and if we want to see our American home grow into a place where the government is responsive to the people and not to institutions that are bigger than the people. And alarmingly, at this point, we're dealing with corporations that are bigger than governments.
Yep.
We're dealing with corporations that want to see an end to governments, and they just want to be able to float freely through the world, extracting resources where they want to, and changing the rules where they want to. So if we, as a community, are pushing back against that everywhere we have a voice, it's not a narrow activism, like you said, just for this country that we know so much about, but this ought to be an awakening. Keep us out of the center, because the role of, and I think, Jane, you spoke so eloquently on this, part of the reason the choir is misinformed is because there's a concerted effort. With that demonization, the goal is, I'm going to make it so confusing that you think it's just better for me to stay over here. I know what's going on. I'd like to share a website. This is Get Fact ET. Is an incredible organization.
Yes.
And I would encourage you to direct any English language speaker who does not have the full understanding of all of the languages that this propaganda war. I mean, this has been a real 21st century war, this war in Ethiopia. The conventional warfare on the battlefronts has been incredibly different than past wars, and the media landscape warfare has been very different. So I think Get Fact ET is a really great resource. It's put together by unpaid Ethiopian Americans here who are just, like me, recognizing that the narrative we're being given and what they can see from collecting all of the available sources, as well as talking to people that they know and reaching into the shared cultural context that we have as Ethiopian Americans. So I think, like Jane said, it's educating people. And I think for Ethiopian Americans, we have to start with our family. If we can't activate our apolitical cousins, if we can't activate our very Americanized children, if we can't activate our uncles and aunts who maybe, the TPLF did a very good job of being an ethno-nationalist party that made a good point of allowing a few other people to succeed with them. We see tokenism it's a very important part of this liberal system of ethnic division and identity politics that has been that sort of replaced segregation, where you divide people by who they are, and then you convince them that you're not doing that division. And yes, Breakthrough News, another excellent source. Thank you for bringing, we have a little chat going in the side, guys. Another great English language source. Eugene Puryear and Reina Kalek do really great work there. I think they went to Ethiopia recently and are showing some of the devastation that was left in the wake of TPLF. So educate people, awaken your family, because if we're not all speaking with one voice, like Ethiopia said, if we don't love each other, we can't demand people respect us. And then the third thing is to start doing that advocacy and just as we prevail, because like I said, as a person of faith, I know we will prevail. But when that happens, Ethiopians and Eritreans need to stay as an activated bloc, because this is not going to end. We are being visited by an active machinery, and it's not one that serves U.S. interests, even though it speaks in the name of U.S. interests. And after 40 years of forever war, or really it is 40 years, because we went straight from the Cold War right into the war on terror. And now the Biden administration is trying to march us into a new Cold War with China, where we have a different way of competing with China. I do not want my cousins to face a future of working in the same conditions that people experience making iPhones. And US business doesn't care about that. But I do, as an Ethiopian American. And if we empower our immigrant communities and empower our activist communities, and I love what you said about a friendship policy, that's what we need to be pushing for, and we need to stay actively pushing for, not just in our own countries. But imagine if we were marching in this kind of solidarity with Venezuelans, if we're marching in this kind of solidarity with BLM. We need to remain an engaged and active demographic in this country, and that protects us going forward, because water will remain a contentious issue. Who knows what next mineral will, graphene could be found in Ethiopia. So if we want to really push for a world that recognizes the sovereignty of humans over corporations, it's going to be a long fight where we might get not an easy win, but an early win.
Yes. It's definitely a long fight. And here on Adebabay Media, we have a saying that, fighting imperialism is not about politics. As you mentioned, activating our non-political cousins and family members. We have this thing in our culture where if you speak about what's going on in Ethiopia, what's going on around you, it's automatically labeled political. And it's not political anymore. Fighting for freedom is no longer political. They are coming after our innate God-given freedom, right? And that's no longer political. So yes, we need to definitely learn to activate and communicate these conversations in a way that make it really easy to digest for folks that may not be connected to these different struggles. Another thing to the website that you shared, Tehut, for those that are also interested, they do prepare pamphlets and brochures that you could print, you could distribute in your NoMore marches, or just with your friends and families. They've done such a good job at collecting all the information that you need to be informed. I really appreciate you guys coming out here. I know it's in the middle of the week to have this long conversation with me. But before we close, I want to give you back the floor to both of you to really talk to us about what you want people to get, any last words that you want to share with us, and also maybe how give homework to the youth, make sure that we're staying engaged and we're continuing this fight and not getting distracted. Jane, I'll give you the floor first.
Speaking to the youth, I got involved as a very young person, and I never, people told me, well, you're just a kid, what can you do? And, it's sort of a cliche, but the youth are the future. And it's never too young to get involved. So, and if the young people don't get involved, I'm old now. And so there has to be an infusion of new young people into our movements so that they can continue into the future. So I also, loved what Tehut said about being a person of faith. And I think that my belief is, the most sincere form of prayer is action. So we have to do the action, take the actions that are necessary to bring into, to manifest, the visions that we have for a more peaceful and just future.
I love that. Thank you. And Tehut, any last words and anything you'd like to say to our youth as well?
Yes, that's who I most specifically want to talk to. I think I deeply understand the experience of not wanting to get involved in something you might not fully understand, not wanting to risk your relationships with other Habeshas. Like, we work so hard in my generation to paper over our divisions and create a sense of belonging with each other. And I think recognizing that Ethiopia's struggle for self-determination is not one of subjugation or hierarchy or creating an oppressive force. I at the beginning of this conflict, I had a friend who said, you hate TPLF so much, you don't even care about the suffering of your own people if you support Ethiopia in this conflict. And I think it's important to look at that kind of a condemnation and say, no, I care about human flowering so much that I refuse to believe that this ethno-supremacist, violent, corrupt organization is you as a people. I think when we speak for Ethiopia, we have to speak in consistent, forgiving, empathetic love for every Ethiopian, and learning about our history from that place, and recognizing that you can stand against this fight without understanding the entirety of what's going on, without understanding the depth of 70 years of politics and trauma. You can just say, I see that taking a ceasefire as an opportunity to spread violence into two regions shows me that this isn't an organization that actually cares about people. I can see that when, I think Thomas Sankara said, if you ever see Western media praising me, you know I've betrayed you. And I would just encourage everybody who doesn't feel like they understand this or they can't get involved in this to, again, get fact, et.org. There's a lot of information there. And at minimum, as an American, we raised the debt ceiling. They were able to put a carve out to the filibuster in for that. And in order to keep paying for Syria, to keep paying for going to war in Iraq, the reason Egypt can't fully invade Ethiopia right now and end the Gerd Dam is because they're fighting in Libya. They're too busy fighting the war Samantha Powers and Susan Rice started. So you don't have to be a deeply seasoned, I'm sure I made at least 4 historical mistakes while I was talking to you right now. I deeply apologize. My people, correct me. I'm here to learn. So you don't have to know everything to know justice. And I would encourage you to look for what justice is here.
Absolutely. I think as far as making mistakes, that might be a big thing for most of us that didn't necessarily grow up paying attention to what was going on in Ethiopia. And a story that always I loved learning about was Malcolm X's, when the kind of activist he was when he started and the kind of activist he became at the end of his life were almost completely different, right? Because he learned along the way. And yes, we're definitely going to make mistakes and we'll apologize for those mistakes, but we definitely need to speak up and learn and grow as an activist, make sure that we don't get stuck in one situation in one country and any of that, like anything like that. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for both of you for being here. I know Answer Coalition has a contact information, a YouTube channel and such. Jane, if you could tell us a little bit about where we can find you, where we can find the work that you guys are doing, any information that we could get from you guys as well.
Sure. Answercoalition.org on the web. There's a Facebook page, also Answer Coalition. I'm sure, no doubt, there's Instagram, who knows what all else. It's not directly, officially connected to Answer, but the Breakthrough News is on YouTube. It's on Facebook. It's probably on other things as well, but on YouTube, Breakthrough News, you get coverage like you saw from Eugene. He has other shows he does. So if you like what he had to say about Ethiopia, listen to what he has to say about other issues as well. He does a daily short podcast called The Punch Out, where he talks about sort of the headlines. So he's a very dear friend of mine, in addition to being a great inspiration to me. So check it out. Check out Breakthrough News, and answercoalition.org is the website.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone that stayed with us through this show. We will have an evening show today. Thank you. ዛሬ ማታ ሌላ ፕሮግራም ይኖረናል። እስከዛ ድረስ መልካም ቆይታ ይሁንላችሁ እንላለን። መልካም ውሎ።
You're broken down and tired.
For the whole year, the narrative was a false narrative. It was all about TPLF. The people that were committing the crime were being seen as victims. And the victims that were being killed, massacred, like these names that you're holding from my cadre, were being seen as the aggressors.
We gon' walk it out.
We in the Black Alliance for Peace stand in uncompromising opposition to the U.S.-led imperialist aggression against Ethiopia and by extension against her neighboring countries, Eritrea, Somalia, and beyond.
The U.S. military is not welcome in Africa.
U.S. policy has actually been very consistent for the last 40 years when it comes to the Horn of Africa. Keep them divided.
No more. No more. No more. We will not scapegoat you. We will not start another war. We should not do so.
When will these women find justice? When will these poor people find peace?
Hands up, Ethiopia! Hands up, Ethiopia! Hands up, Eritrea! Hands up, Eritrea!
The U.S. government is wrong. The European governments are wrong. CNN is wrong. All of them have turned these pernicious lies about what's happening into Ethiopia into yet another regime change operation.
Who wants freedom for Africans?
Ethiopia!
Who has defeated invaders for generations?
Ethiopia!
The people united will never be defeated.
Biden administration!
Biden administration!
Stop the war on Ethiopia!
On Ethiopia!
We are Ethiopia! Three nations!
ሱዳናውያን፣ አፍሪካውያን፣ ናይጄሪያ፣ ኬንያ፣ ሌሎችም እየቆሙ ነው ያሉ። ኖሞር እያለ ያለው ኢትዮጵያዊ ብቻ አይደለም አፍሪካዊም ነው።
ኢትዮጵያ! ኢትዮጵያ!